The courthouse steps were slick with morning dew when Gwendolyn Keller stood before the crowd and said the one thing nobody in St. Joseph, Missouri wanted to hear in the spring of 1878. Jacob Hartman did not kill anyone, and every person standing here knows the real murderer is walking free among us. The murmurs started immediately, rolling through the gathered townspeople like thunder before a storm. Gwendolyn held her ground, her green eyes scanning the faces she had known her entire 22 years. Her father had been the schoolteacher here before consumption took him 3 winters past, and her mother had followed him within the year. Now, Gwendolyn taught the children herself, living in the small house her parents had left her, surviving on the meager salary the town provided. She had everything to lose by speaking up, but Jacob Hartman was barely 17, and she had seen him studying his primer at her schoolhouse the very afternoon that wealthy cattle baron Richard Morrison had been shot dead in his study. "Miss Keller, you need to step aside." Sheriff Warren Polk moved toward her, his hand hovering near his pistol. He was a thick man with a gray mustache that drooped over his thin lips, and his eyes held no warmth. "Jacob was with me," Gwendolyn said, her voice carrying across the square. "He was learning his letters. He left my schoolhouse at 6 in the evening, and Dr. Brennan said Morrison was killed at 4:30. The boy could not have done both." "The doctor could be wrong about the time," someone shouted from the crowd. "Dr. Brennan is never wrong," Gwendolyn shot back. "And Morrison's pocket watch was smashed when he fell. It stopped at exactly 4:32. "Maybe the boy had an accomplice," Sheriff Polk said, his jaw tightening. "Maybe you are covering for him because you have tender feelings." The accusation stung, but Gwendolyn kept her chin high. "I am covering for the truth, Sheriff, something you seem less interested in than closing this case quickly." The crowd's mood shifted. Some people looked uncomfortable, shuffling their feet. Others looked angry. Gwendolyn knew she had just made enemies, but Jacob Hartman's mother had wept in her kitchen last night, begging her to help, and Gwendolyn could not stand by while an innocent boy hanged. That was when she saw him. A cowboy leaning against the post outside the general store, watching the scene with intense blue eyes that seemed to take in everything. He was tall and lean, probably in his mid-20s, with dark hair that needed cutting and a face weathered by sun and wind. His clothes were dusty from the trail, and a worn leather saddlebag rested at his feet. He was a stranger, which meant he had no stake in St. Joseph's politics or secrets. Their eyes met across the square, and something passed between them. Recognition, maybe, though they had never met. Or perhaps just an acknowledgement that she had spoken a truth that needed speaking. Sheriff Polk grabbed Gwendolyn's arm. "You will come with me, Miss Keller. We need to discuss this disruption. Take your hand off her." The cowboy's voice cut through the commotion, quiet but carrying an edge that made people turn. The sheriff's face reddened. "This is none of your concern, stranger. The lady said the boy is innocent." The cowboy straightened, and Gwendolyn noticed the pistol at his hip, worn from use but well-maintained. "She gave you evidence. Seems to me you should be investigating instead of threatening her." "Who in blazes are you?" Sheriff Polk's hand moved to his gun. "Owen Foster." "Just passing through, or I was." Owen's eyes never left the sheriff's face. "But I have got time to see justice done if that is what is needed." The crowd had gone silent. Gwendolyn felt her heart hammering against her ribs. No one in St. Joseph had stood up to Sheriff Polk in years, not since he had consolidated power with the help of the Morrison family and the other wealthy landowners who really ran this town. "This is town business," the sheriff said through gritted teeth. "Murder is everyone's business," Owen replied, "especially when you are about to hang an innocent boy for it." Sheriff Polk released Gwendolyn's arm but pointed a thick finger at her face. "You keep silent about this, Miss Keller, or you will find yourself without employment. This town does not need a schoolteacher who spreads lies and causes trouble." He turned and stomped away, his deputy following. The crowd began to disperse, some people shooting Gwendolyn sympathetic looks, others glaring at her with open hostility. She stood on the courthouse steps, suddenly aware that her legs were shaking. Owen Foster picked up his saddlebag and crossed the square to her. Up close, she could see the kindness in his eyes despite the hard set of his jaw. "Thank you," she managed to say. "You did not have to do that." "Yes, I did." He shifted the bag on his shoulder. "I heard what you said. Takes courage to stand up like that." "It takes desperation," Gwendolyn corrected. "Jacob Hartman is a good boy. His father died in a farming accident and his mother takes in washing to feed her children. Jacob wants to better himself, to learn to read and write so he can make something of his life. He would never kill anyone." "But someone did kill Morrison," Owen said thoughtfully, "and someone wants the boy to hang for it." Gwendolyn looked at him carefully. "Why are you here in St. Joseph, Mr. Foster?" "Owen, please." He gave her a slight smile. "I was heading west to find ranch work. Heard there might be opportunities in Kansas. But my horse threw a shoe yesterday, so I am stuck here until the blacksmith can tend to her." "That could take a few days. Harold Jenkins is the only blacksmith and he is slow when he wants to be." Gwendolyn bit her lip. "You should know that by helping me, you have made yourself unpopular with dangerous people." "I have been unpopular before." Owen glanced back at the courthouse. "When is the boy's trial?" "Tomorrow morning. Judge Hendricks is coming from Kansas City on the afternoon train today." "That is fast." "Too fast," Gwendolyn agreed. "They want this over with before anyone asks too many questions." Owen was quiet for a moment, studying the buildings around the square. "Where can a man get breakfast in this town? The boarding house serves meals. Mrs. Patterson's place down the street past the church." "Will you join me?" Owen asked. "We should talk about what you know." Gwendolyn hesitated. Being seen with this stranger would only fuel more gossip, but she had already ruined her reputation by defending Jacob. "All right, but I am paying for my own meal." "Fair enough." Owen gestured for her to lead the way. "Mrs. Patterson's boarding house was a 2-story frame building with a wide porch and lace curtains in the windows. The landlady herself was a widow of 50 with sharp eyes and a sharper tongue, but she had always been kind to Gwendolyn. "Miss Keller, Mrs. Patterson said when they entered the dining room. "I heard what you did at the courthouse. Brave but foolish." "Perhaps both," Gwendolyn admitted. "This is Mr. Foster. He needs a room for a few days." Mrs. Patterson looked Owen up and down, her assessment thorough. "I've got one room available. $3 for the week, meals included." $2, Owen countered. "I will chop your firewood and fix anything that needs fixing." The widow's lips twitched. $2.50 and you clean the gutters too. Deal." Owen offered his hand and they shook on it. They sat at a corner table, and Mrs. Patterson brought them coffee, eggs, bacon, and fresh biscuits. Gwendolyn realized she had not eaten since yesterday afternoon, too nervous about speaking up today to keep anything down. "Tell me everything," Owen said quietly, keeping his voice low so the other diners could not hear. "Start from the beginning." Gwendolyn wrapped her hands around her coffee cup, gathering her thoughts. Richard Morrison was the wealthiest man in Buchanan County. He owned the biggest cattle ranch, had stakes in the railroad, and controlled most of the local businesses through loans and partnerships. He was not a kind man. He drove people off their land when they could not pay their debts, and he had a reputation for taking what he wanted, including women. Owen asked bluntly. Gwendolyn felt her cheeks flush but nodded. "There were rumors. Nothing proven, but yes. His wife died 10 years ago, and since then there have been stories about serving girls at his ranch. And Jacob Hartman. Jacob's mother, Marion, worked as a cook at the Morrison Ranch about 6 months ago. She only lasted 2 weeks before she quit. She would not say why, but I saw the bruises on her arms. Gwendolyn's voice hardened. Morrison tried something with her. I am certain of it. She left that job and has been struggling ever since. No one wants to hire someone who quit on Morrison. Owen's jaw tightened. So the sheriff's theory is that Jacob killed Morrison in revenge for his mother. That is what they are saying. But Jacob is slight, barely 130 pounds, and Morrison was a big man. Even if Jacob wanted revenge, he would not have the strength or the means. Besides, I told you, he was with me that afternoon. Who found Morrison's body? His foreman, a man named Clayton Pierce. He said he went to the house to discuss some business with Morrison and found him dead in his study, shot twice in the chest. What about Morrison's family? He has one son, Thomas. He is 26 and has been running the ranch operations for the past few years. He was supposedly in Kansas City that day, meeting with cattle buyers. Gwendolyn leaned forward. But here is what does not make sense. Morrison's safe was open when they found him. Clayton Pierce said Morrison never left that safe open. But nothing was missing, not the cash or the land deeds or anything else. Owen's eyes sharpened. So whoever killed him was looking for something specific, or wanted it to look like a robbery but lost their nerve. Or they were interrupted, Gwendolyn suggested. Or they found what they wanted and it was not anything of monetary value. Papers, letters, perhaps. Gwendolyn took a sip of her coffee. Morrison had secrets, Owen. Everyone knew it. He had power over this town because he knew things about people, things they did not want revealed. Blackmail, Owen said flatly. I cannot prove it, but yes, I think so. They ate in silence for a few minutes. Gwendolyn watched Owen's face, seeing the wheels turning behind his eyes. He had the look of someone who had seen trouble before and knew how to handle it. Tell me about Sheriff Polk, Owen finally said. He has been sheriff for 8 years. Before that, he worked as Morrison's head of security at the ranch. Morrison got him elected, funded his campaign. They were close. So the sheriff has every reason to protect Morrison's reputation and close this case quickly, Owen mused. If it comes out that Morrison was blackmailing people, there will be questions about who might have wanted him dead. Real questions with real suspects. Important people might be implicated. Exactly. But if they can blame a poor farm boy whose mother Morrison assaulted, it wraps everything up neatly. Jacob cannot afford a real lawyer, and most people would rather believe a simple story than face uncomfortable truths about the man who ran this town. Gwendolyn felt the frustration building in her chest. It is wrong, Owen. It is all wrong, and I cannot stand by and let it happen. Owen reached across the table and covered her hand with his. The gesture surprised her, but his hand was warm and calloused and steady. You will not stand by alone, he said quietly. I will help you. Why? Gwendolyn searched his face. You do not know me or Jacob or anyone in this town. Why would you risk yourself? Owen was quiet for a moment, his thumb brushing absently across her knuckles. 3 years ago, I watched a friend hang for a murder he did not commit. I knew he was innocent, but I was too afraid to speak up, too worried about protecting myself. I have lived with that shame every day since. I will not make the same mistake twice. The raw honesty in his voice made Gwendolyn's throat tight. She turned her hand over, lacing her fingers with his. Then we had better figure out who really killed Richard Morrison before tomorrow morning. They spent the rest of the morning planning their investigation. Owen suggested they start by talking to anyone who might have seen something the day of the murder. Gwendolyn knew most of the townspeople and could introduce him, which would make people more willing to talk. Their first stop was Dr. Brennan's office. The doctor was a precise man in his 50s with wire-rimmed spectacles and an air of professional detachment. He received them in his examination room, which smelled of carbolic acid and camphor. "Miss Keller," he greeted her with a nod, then turned his curious gaze to Owen. "And you are the stranger who challenged Sheriff Polk this morning. Word travels fast in St. Joseph." "Owen Foster, sir." Owen shook the doctor's hand. "I hope we are not interrupting your work." "Not at all. I have been expecting someone to come asking questions, though I confess I thought it would be a lawyer, not a cowboy and a schoolteacher." Dr. Brennan gestured for them to sit. "What would you like to know?" "You examined Morrison's body," Gwendolyn said. "Can you tell us exactly what you found?" The doctor pulled out a leather-bound notebook and flipped through the pages. "Richard Morrison died from 2 gunshot wounds to the chest, both fired at close range. The bullets entered here and here." He indicated spots on his own chest. "Death would have been nearly instantaneous. Based on body temperature and rigor mortis, I estimated time of death between 4 and 5 in the afternoon. The stopped pocket watch confirmed 4:32. "Could you be wrong about the time?" Owen asked. "It is possible but unlikely. Everything was consistent with my estimate." Dr. Brennan fixed them with a stern look. "I heard Miss Keller say that Jacob Hartman was with her at 6 that evening. If that is true, and if my time of death is accurate, then the boy could not have committed this murder." "I spoke the truth," Gwendolyn said firmly. "Jacob was at the schoolhouse from 4 until 6. We were working on his reading." "Then someone else killed Richard Morrison," the doctor said simply. "I have told this to Sheriff Polk, but he seems unconvinced." "What about Morrison's son?" Owen asked. "Did you speak with Thomas Morrison?" "Briefly. He returned from Kansas City the day after his father's death. He seemed—" The doctor paused, choosing his words carefully, more concerned about the ranch's business affairs than grieving, but people mourn in different ways. "Did Thomas and his father get along?" Gwendolyn asked. Dr. Brennan closed his notebook. "That is not a medical question, Miss Keller." "But you might have an opinion," Owen pressed gently. The doctor sighed. "Richard Morrison was a difficult man. He was demanding of his son, critical, never satisfied. Thomas has worked himself to the bone trying to earn his father's approval. Whether he ever received it, I could not say." They thanked the doctor and left. Outside, the midday sun was high and hot, and the streets were busy with people going about their business. Gwendolyn felt eyes following them as they walked. "Thomas Morrison might have wanted his father dead," Owen said thoughtfully, "to inherit the ranch and finally be free of his father's control." "But he was supposedly in Kansas City," Gwendolyn reminded him. "Supposedly. We should verify that." Owen stopped walking and turned to her. "Gwendolyn, I need to ask you something, and I want you to be honest with me." The use of her first name sent a small flutter through her stomach. "All right. Is there anyone in this town who might want to hurt you?" "Anyone who would have a reason to see you discredited or worse." Gwendolyn thought about it. "The sheriff now, because I challenged him publicly. And anyone who benefited from Morrison's death would not want me asking questions. But before today, no. I am just the schoolteacher." Owen's expression was serious. "You are the woman who stood up when everyone else stayed silent. That makes you dangerous to whoever really committed this murder. You need to be careful." "Are you trying to frighten me?" Gwendolyn asked, though her heart was already beating faster. "I am trying to protect you." Owen's hand moved to rest on the small of her back, a protective gesture that felt both presumptuous and entirely natural. "We are stirring up trouble, Gwendolyn. Powerful people are not going to like it." As if to prove his point, Clayton Pierce emerged from the land office across the street. Morrison's foreman was a compact man with a scarred face and cold eyes. He saw them and changed direction, heading straight for them. "Miss Keller," Pierce said, his voice like gravel. "I hear you have been spreading lies about Mr. Morrison." "I have been speaking the truth," Gwendolyn replied, keeping her voice steady despite the intimidation radiating from the man. "The truth is that the Hartman boy murdered my employer in cold blood, and he is going to hang for it." Pierce's gaze shifted to Owen. "You are making a mistake getting involved in this, stranger. St. Joseph does not take kindly to outsiders interfering in our business." "Then it is a good thing I am not an outsider anymore," Owen said mildly. "I have taken a room at the boarding house." "Seems I will be staying a while." Pierce's jaw worked. "Miss Keller, Mr. Morrison's son wants to speak with you, today at the ranch. 2 o'clock. Gwendolyn felt a chill run down her spine. Why would Thomas Morrison want to speak with me? He did not share his reasons with me, Pierce said. "But I would advise you to go. The Morrison family has been generous to this town. It would be unfortunate if that generosity dried up, especially for certain institutions like the schoolhouse." The threat was barely veiled. Gwendolyn lifted her chin. "Tell Mr. Morrison I will be there." Pierce nodded curtly and walked away. "You are not going alone," Owen said immediately. "I have to go. If I refuse, they will use it against Jacob somehow, or they will fire me and close the school." Gwendolyn watched Pierce disappear around the corner. "But you are right. I would feel better if you came with me." They had a few hours before the meeting, so they decided to visit the jail to see Jacob. Sheriff Polk was not there, but his young deputy, Sam Crawford, was manning the office. Sam was only 19, fresh-faced and clearly uncomfortable with the whole situation. "Miss Keller," he said, standing up quickly when they entered. "I do not know if the sheriff would want me to let you see the prisoner." "The sheriff is not here, Sam," Gwendolyn said gently. "And I taught you your letters just 5 years ago. You know me. You know I would not do anything wrong." Sam's face reddened. "I know, Miss Keller, it is just that Sheriff Polk said." "5 minutes," Owen interjected, pulling a silver dollar from his pocket and setting it on the desk. "We just want to talk to the boy." Sam looked at the coin, then at Gwendolyn's pleading face. 5 minutes, but if the sheriff comes back, I am going to say you pushed past me." "Fair enough," Owen agreed. Jacob Hartman was in the only cell, sitting on a narrow cot with his head in his hands. He looked up when they approached, and Gwendolyn's heart broke at the fear in his eyes. "Miss Keller," Jacob said, his voice cracking. "My ma said you spoke up for me. Thank you." "Of course, Jacob." Gwendolyn gripped the bars. "I know you did not do this. Nobody else believes me." The boy wiped his eyes roughly. "They are going to hang me tomorrow, and I did not even do anything wrong." "We are working to prove your innocence," Owen said. "But we need your help. Think carefully, Jacob. Did you see anyone near the Morrison ranch the day of the murder? Anyone at all?" Jacob's brow furrowed. "I was not near the ranch, sir. I was at Miss Keller's school. But on your way there or on your way home? Did you see anyone riding hard or acting strangely?" The boy thought hard. "I saw Mr. Finch, the banker, riding out of town that afternoon. I thought it was odd because he usually takes his carriage, but he was on horseback and going fast." "What time was this?" Gwendolyn asked urgently. "About 3:30, maybe. I remember because the church bells had just rung the half-hour." Gwendolyn and Owen exchanged glances. Walter Finch was the president of St. Joseph First Bank, a nervous little man who had always seemed afraid of his own shadow. "Did anyone else see him?" Owen asked. "I do not know, sir. I just remember it because Mr. Finch does not usually ride like that." They talked for a few more minutes, trying to reassure Jacob that they were doing everything they could. When they left the jail, Gwendolyn felt the weight of responsibility pressing down on her shoulders. "We have to talk to Finch," she said. After we meet with Thomas Morrison, Owen agreed. We do not want to spook anyone yet. If Finch was involved, he might run or destroy evidence. They walked back to the boarding house so Owen could clean up before the meeting. Gwendolyn waited in the parlor, her mind racing. Everything was happening so fast, and she felt like she was in over her head. But every time doubt crept in, she remembered Jacob's terrified face and knew she had to keep fighting. Owen came downstairs wearing a clean shirt, his hair still damp from washing. He had shaved, and Gwendolyn was struck again by how handsome he was, in a rough, weathered way that spoke of hard living and harder choices. "You look worried," he said, sitting beside her on the sofa. "I am worried. We are about to confront the son of the man who ran this town, based on nothing but the word of a frightened boy and a stopped pocket watch." Owen took her hand again, and this time the gesture felt less surprising and more necessary. "We are not confronting anyone. We are just listening to what Thomas Morrison has to say. Maybe he knows something that can help us. Or maybe he is the killer and we are walking into a trap," Gwendolyn said. "That is why I am coming with you." Owen's thumb traced circles on the back of her hand. "I will not let anything happen to you, Gwendolyn." She looked into his blue eyes and saw the sincerity there. It was strange how much she trusted this man she had only met this morning, but there was something solid and honest about Owen Foster that made her feel safe. "We should go," she said softly. "It is nearly 2. They borrowed a buggy from Mrs. Patterson and drove out to the Morrison ranch. The spread was impressive, thousands of acres of rolling grassland dotted with cattle. The main house was a sprawling 2-story structure with white columns and a wide veranda, built to impress. Thomas Morrison was waiting for them on the veranda. He was a tall man with his father's build but a softer face, as if life had not yet hardened him the way it had hardened Richard Morrison. He wore a black suit for morning and his eyes were tired. "Miss Keller," he said, coming down the steps to greet them. "Thank you for coming. And you must be Mr. Foster, the man who challenged Sheriff Polk this morning." "News travels fast," Owen observed. "In a town this size, everything travels fast." Thomas gestured to the veranda. "Please, let us sit. I had my cook prepare some lemonade." They sat in wicker chairs and a young Mexican woman brought out a pitcher and glasses. Gwendolyn noticed the girl would not meet Thomas's eyes, and she wondered about her story. "I asked you here because I want to understand what is happening," Thomas began, pouring the lemonade himself. "My father was murdered 5 days ago. The sheriff arrested Jacob Hartman." It seemed straightforward. "But then you stood up this morning and said the boy was innocent, that he was with you when my father died." "He was," Gwendolyn said firmly. "I would not lie about something like that." Thomas studied her face. "No, I do not believe you would. You have a reputation for honesty, Miss Keller. It is one of the reasons I wanted to speak with you." He set down the pitcher. "I need to know the truth about how my father died. Even if that truth implicates someone you know," Owen asked carefully, "especially then." Thomas's voice was heavy. "My father was not a good man, Mr. Foster. I loved him because he was my father, but I was not blind to his faults. He hurt people. He used people. And I have spent my entire adult life trying to clean up his messes and protect this ranch from his worst impulses." Gwendolyn felt a flicker of sympathy for the man. "Did you and your father argue, constantly, about how he treated the hands, about his business practices, about everything?" Thomas took a long drink of lemonade. "The day before he died, we had our worst fight yet. He told me I was weak, that I did not have the spine to run this ranch, that I was going to lose everything he had built." "What were you fighting about?" Owen asked. Thomas hesitated, then seemed to make a decision. He had evidence against several important men in this county. Letters, documents, proof of things they wanted kept secret. He was using this information to control them, to get favorable business deals, to manipulate local politics. I told him it had to stop, that it was wrong. He laughed at me. Who were these men? Gwendolyn leaned forward. I do not know all of them. Father kept his blackmail materials in his personal safe, and he never let me see inside. Thomas's hands clenched into fists. But I know Walter Finch, the banker, was one of them. I heard them arguing about 6 months ago. Finch was begging my father to destroy some documents, and my father was demanding a larger stake in the bank. What about Sheriff Polk? Owen asked. Thomas's laugh was bitter. The sheriff is little more than my father's dog. Father paid for his election, and Polk has been doing his bidding ever since. If my father had dirt on anyone, it would be Polk. The pieces were starting to come together. Gwendolyn's mind worked furiously. Thomas, when you found your father, was the safe open or closed? Open. Clayton said it was open when he found the body, and it was still open when I arrived the next day. Was anything missing? That is the strange thing. All the money was still there, all the land deeds, everything valuable. But I do not know what was in there before, so I cannot say if anything was taken. Letters, Owen said. Or documents. Whoever killed your father took the evidence he had been using for blackmail. Thomas nodded slowly. That would make sense, but who? Finch, Polk, someone else. We saw Finch riding hard toward the ranch the afternoon of the murder, Gwendolyn said. Around 3:30, Thomas's eyes widened. That was an hour before my father died. Finch could have gotten here, argued with him, and shot him. But why leave the safe open? Owen mused. If Finch came here to retrieve the documents, why not close the safe after and make it look like nothing was taken? Maybe someone interrupted him, Gwendolyn suggested. Or maybe he wanted it to look like a robbery. Or maybe he was not the only person here that afternoon, Owen said grimly. They sat in silence for a moment, the implications sinking in. If multiple people had visited Morrison that day, any one of them could be the killer, or they could all be involved somehow. Where were you that day, Thomas? Owen asked bluntly. The younger Morrison did not take offense. I was in Kansas City, meeting with cattle buyers at the stockyards. I have witnesses, including the buyers themselves and the hotel clerk where I stayed. I took the morning train and did not return until the next day when Clayton sent me a telegram about my father's death. We need to talk to Finch, Gwendolyn said, and to Clayton Pierce. We need to know exactly what time he found the body and whether he saw anyone else around. Thomas stood up. Clayton is out with the herds right now, but he should be back by evening. You are welcome to come back and speak with him. As for Finch, you will probably find him at the bank. It is open until 4 on Saturdays. They thanked Thomas and prepared to leave. As they were climbing into the buggy, Thomas called out, Miss Keller, Mr. Foster, be careful. If my father was killed over those documents, whoever has them now will not hesitate to kill again to keep them hidden. The drive back to town was tense. Gwendolyn kept replaying the conversation in her mind, trying to make all the pieces fit. You believe him? She asked Owen. About being in Kansas City, we can verify it easily enough. If he is lying, people will remember. Owen guided the horse carefully around a rut in the road. But my gut says he was telling the truth. He seemed genuinely troubled by his father's blackmail schemes. So we focus on Finch. And on finding out who else might have been at the ranch that day. They reached St. Joseph just before 4 and headed straight to the bank. Walter Finch was in his office, a small, nervous man with thinning hair and ink-stained fingers. He looked up when they entered and went pale. Miss Keller, he stammered, how can I help you? We want to talk to you about Richard Morrison, Gwendolyn said, closing the office door behind them. Finch's Adam's apple bobbed as he swallowed hard. A terrible tragedy, just terrible. You were seen riding toward the Morrison ranch the afternoon he was killed, Owen said, not bothering with pleasantries. Around 3:30. The color drained completely from Finch's face. I do not know what you are talking about. Do not lie to us, Walter, Gwendolyn said firmly. A witness saw you. What were you doing at Morrison's ranch? Finch's hands shook as he reached for a handkerchief to mop his brow. This is absurd. I was here at the bank all day. Your clerk said you left at 3, Owen said. It was a bluff, but it worked. Finch crumpled like a paper doll. All right, yes, I went to see Morrison, but I did not kill him, I swear it. Why were you there? Gwendolyn pressed. The banker's voice dropped to a whisper. Morrison had letters I wrote to someone I should not have written to. If those letters became public, I would be ruined. My wife would leave me. I would lose my position at the bank. I would be a laughing stock. Letters to whom? Owen asked. Finch's face burned red. To a woman. A married woman. It was a mistake, a moment of weakness, but Morrison found out somehow, and he has been bleeding me dry for 6 months. I went there to beg him one more time to destroy the letters. And did he? I never got the chance to ask him. Finch wiped his face again. When I arrived at the ranch, I saw his study window was open. I heard voices inside, Morrison and someone else, arguing. I could not make out the words, but it sounded heated. I waited in the tree line, hoping the other person would leave so I could talk to Morrison alone. But then I heard gunshots. Gwendolyn's heart raced. What did you do? I panicked. I rode away as fast as I could. I was afraid someone would think I had killed him. Finch looked at them with desperate eyes. But I swear to you, I did not shoot Richard Morrison. He was alive when I heard those voices. Who was Morrison arguing with? Owen demanded. I could not tell. The window was open, but I was too far away to recognize the voice. It was a man, that much I know. What time was this? Just after 4, maybe 10 after. I remember the church bells had rung 4 when I was halfway to the ranch. Owen and Gwendolyn exchanged glances. If Finch was telling the truth, and if Morrison was killed at 4:32 as the watch indicated, then someone had been with Morrison during his final half hour. Did you see anyone else on the road? Gwendolyn asked. Anyone riding away from the ranch? Finch thought hard. No. I was too frightened. I just rode back to town and went straight home. I have been sick with fear ever since. You need to tell this to the sheriff, Owen said. Polk will never believe me. He wants Jacob Hartman to hang for this. He has already decided the boy is guilty. Then you tell it to Judge Hendricks tomorrow at the trial, Gwendolyn insisted. Your testimony could save Jacob's life. Finch buried his face in his hands. If I testify, everyone will know about the letters, about my affair. My life will be over. Gwendolyn leaned across the desk, her voice hard. Jacob Hartman is 17 years old and he is innocent. If you do not speak up, he will die for a crime he did not commit. You will have to decide, Walter, whether your reputation is worth more than a boy's life. They left the bank with more questions than answers. Someone had been in Morrison's study arguing with him shortly before he died, someone whose voice Finch could not identify. That someone had likely pulled the trigger. We need to find out who else had a motive, Owen said as they walked back to the boarding house. The sun was lowering in the sky, painting everything gold and orange. Half the town had a motive if Morrison was blackmailing people, Gwendolyn said wearily. We could be looking for anyone. Owen stopped walking and turned to face her. They were standing on a quiet stretch of boardwalk away from prying eyes. Gwendolyn, I need you to understand something. This is dangerous now. We are getting close to the truth, and whoever killed Morrison is not going to just let us expose them. I know that, she said. I do not think you do. Owen's hands came up to rest on her shoulders, his touch warm through the fabric of her dress. I have been in tight spots before. I know what desperate men are capable of. If something happens to you because I got you involved in this—" "You did not get me involved," Gwendolyn interrupted. "I involved myself by speaking up. I made a choice, Owen, and I am not backing down now." She saw something shift in his eyes, admiration mixed with something deeper. "You are the bravest woman I have ever met," he said softly. "Or the most foolish. Bravery and foolishness often look the same." His hands slid down her arms to take her hands. "But I want you to know something. Whatever happens tomorrow, whatever we find out, I am glad I met you. You remind me of why truth matters, why standing up is worth it even when it costs you." Gwendolyn felt warmth spreading through her chest. They had known each other less than a day, but it felt like longer, like she had been waiting her whole life to meet someone who understood this part of her. "I am glad you were here this morning," she said quietly. "I do not know if I would have had the courage to keep going if you had not stood up with me." Owen's thumb brushed across her knuckles, the gesture achingly tender. "You would have. You have got more courage in your little finger than most men have in their whole body." They stood there on the boardwalk as the sun set, hands clasped, something fragile and precious building between them. Gwendolyn knew she should be thinking about the case, about Jacob, about the trial tomorrow, but all she could focus on was the way Owen was looking at her, like she was something valuable and rare. "We should get some supper," Owen finally said, though he did not let go of her hands. "We have a long night ahead of us." They ate at the boarding house, Mrs. Patterson serving pot roast and potatoes while eyeing them speculatively. Gwendolyn knew the whole town would be talking about her and Owen by morning if they were not already. The schoolteacher and the drifting cowboy trying to prove a murderer innocent. It would make for fine gossip. After supper, they sat in the parlor and went over everything they knew. Owen pulled out a small notebook and pencil from his saddlebag and started making notes. Richard Morrison was killed between 4 and 5 in the afternoon, most likely at 4:32 when his pocket watch stopped, Owen said, writing as he spoke. Walter Finch arrived at the ranch around 4:10 and heard Morrison arguing with an unknown man. Finch fled when he heard gunshots. Jacob was at the schoolhouse with me from 4 until 6, Gwendolyn added, which means he could not have been at the ranch. Thomas Morrison was in Kansas City. Clayton Pierce found the body, but we do not know what time exactly. We need to talk to him. Owen tapped the pencil against the notebook. The safe was open, and presumably some blackmail materials were taken. So whoever killed Morrison either was being blackmailed themselves, or was helping someone who was. Or they killed him for some other reason and took the opportunity to destroy the evidence, Gwendolyn suggested. That is possible too. Owen leaned back in his chair. We need to know who else Morrison was blackmailing. If we can make a list of suspects, we can start eliminating possibilities. Thomas might know more than he told us, Gwendolyn said. Or the staff at the ranch. Someone must have seen or heard something. They decided to return to the Morrison ranch first thing in the morning before the trial began at 10. It was risky, cutting it close, but they needed more information if they were going to save Jacob. Mrs. Patterson came into the parlor and cleared her throat. Miss Keller, it is getting late. People will talk if you stay here much longer without a chaperone. Gwendolyn felt her cheeks flush. I should go home. I will walk you, Owen said immediately, standing. The night air was cool as they walked the 3 blocks to Gwendolyn's small house. The streets were quiet, most people already in for the night. Their footsteps echoed on the boardwalk. Do you live alone? Owen asked. Yes. My parents left me the house when they passed. It is small, but it is mine. Gwendolyn glanced at him. What about you? Do you have family? Not anymore. My parents died when I was young. I was raised by my uncle on his ranch in Texas, but he passed 5 years ago. I have been drifting since then, working where I can find work." "That sounds lonely," Gwendolyn said softly. "It is." Owen's voice was quiet. "I have not had a place to call home in a long time, have not had a reason to stay anywhere." They reached her house, a neat little white cottage with a small garden in front. Gwendolyn turned to face him on the front step. "Thank you for walking me home," she said. "Thank you for letting me help you." Owen's hand came up to brush a strand of hair back from her face, his touch gentle. "You have given me something to fight for, Gwendolyn. I have been wandering for so long I had forgotten what it felt like to care about something." Gwendolyn's breath caught. She could feel the heat of him, smell the faint scent of leather and soap. "Owen." He leaned in slowly, giving her time to pull away, but she did not want to pull away. When his lips met hers, it was soft and sweet and full of promise. Gwendolyn's hands came up to rest on his chest, feeling his heart beating strong and steady beneath her palms. When they parted, Owen rested his forehead against hers. "I have wanted to do that since this morning," he admitted. "I am glad you finally did," Gwendolyn whispered. He kissed her again, longer this time with more feeling. Gwendolyn felt like she was falling, like the ground had disappeared beneath her feet and the only solid thing in the world was Owen's arms around her. When they finally separated, both of them were breathing hard. "I should let you get some rest," Owen said, though he made no move to leave. "Tomorrow is going to be difficult. Be careful going back to the boarding house," Gwendolyn said. "If someone knows we are investigating, I will be fine." Owen squeezed her hands. "Lock your doors and windows. If anything feels wrong, if you hear anything unusual, you get out and come straight to the boarding house. Promise me." "I promise." He kissed her once more, quick and hard, then stepped back. "Good night, Gwendolyn." "Good night, Owen." She watched him walk away until he disappeared around the corner, then went inside and locked the door as he had instructed. Her lips still tingled from his kisses, and her heart felt too big for her chest. She had known Owen Foster for less than 12 hours, but she knew with absolute certainty that he was someone special. Someone worth keeping, if they could just survive tomorrow. Gwendolyn barely slept. She kept thinking about the case, about Jacob, about Owen's kiss. Finally, as dawn light began creeping through her window, she gave up on sleep and got dressed. She chose her most conservative dress, a dark gray wool that would be appropriate for court, and pinned her hair up neatly. She was eating a hasty breakfast of bread and preserves when someone knocked on her door. Her heart jumped, hoping it was Owen, but when she opened the door she found Sheriff Polk standing on her step, his face hard. "Miss Keller," he said coldly, "I am here to escort you to the courthouse." "The trial does not start for another 3 hours," Gwendolyn said, confused. "Judge Hendricks wants to speak with you before the proceedings begin, about your testimony." The sheriff's hand rested on his gun. "It would be best if you came quietly." Alarm bells rang in Gwendolyn's head. "I want to bring someone with me." "This is official business, Miss Keller. You will come alone." Gwendolyn thought fast. If she refused, Polk could arrest her for obstruction or something equally ridiculous. But if she went alone, she would be vulnerable. She wished desperately that Owen was here. "Let me get my shawl," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. She grabbed the shawl from its hook and, on impulse, picked up the fireplace poker and slid it up her sleeve, hidden by the fabric. It was not much of a weapon, but it was better than nothing. Sheriff Polk walked her to the courthouse, his hand on her elbow in a grip that was just shy of painful. The building was empty this early, everyone still at home preparing for the trial. "The judge is not here yet," Gwendolyn said as they entered. "He will be shortly," Polk said, steering her toward the back hallway. "We will wait in the judge's chambers." But they walked past the judge's chambers and down a narrow staircase to the basement. Gwendolyn's alarm turned to fear. "Where are we going?" she demanded, trying to pull away. Polk's grip tightened. Somewhere we can talk privately. The basement was dark and damp, used for storage. Polk lit a lantern, revealing stacks of old furniture and legal documents. He shoved Gwendolyn into a chair and stood over her. "You need to stop this nonsense about Jacob Hartman being innocent," he said flatly. "He is innocent. You know he is. What I know is that Richard Morrison is dead and someone needs to pay for it." Polk's face was inches from hers. "The boy is poor, his mother is nobody, and he has no one to speak for him except a meddling schoolteacher and a drifting cowboy. No one important cares if he hangs. I care. Owen cares. The truth cares." Gwendolyn's fear was transforming into anger. "You are going to let an innocent boy die to protect the real killer. The real killer is far more valuable to this town than some farm boy," Polk said, "and you are going to keep your mouth shut about it." "Who are you protecting?" Gwendolyn demanded. "Who killed Morrison?" Polk's hand shot out and grabbed her throat, not squeezing but threatening. "You are going to go into that courtroom this morning and say you were mistaken about the time. Say Jacob left the schoolhouse at 3, not 6. Say you were confused." "I will do no such thing." "Then you will have an accident." Polk's voice was cold. "A tragic fall down these basement stairs. You will break your neck, and no one will question it because everyone knows you have been under terrible stress." Gwendolyn's hand tightened around the poker hidden in her sleeve. "You are going to kill me because I am telling the truth. I am going to kill you because you are a threat to powerful people, and because you are making this far more difficult than it needs to be." Polk's hand tightened slightly on her throat. "Last chance, Miss Keller. Recant your testimony or die." Gwendolyn yanked the poker from her sleeve and swung it as hard as she could at Polk's head. The sheriff jerked back and the poker glanced off his shoulder instead of his skull. He cursed and grabbed for his gun. Gwendolyn ran. She bolted for the stairs, her skirts hampering her movement. She could hear Polk behind her, swearing. She made it to the first floor and ran for the front door, but Polk was faster. He caught her around the waist and slammed her into the wall. "You stupid woman," he snarled. Then the front door crashed open and Owen was there, his gun drawn, his face white with fury. "Get away from her," he said, his voice deadly quiet. Polk froze, then slowly released Gwendolyn. She stumbled away from him, gasping for breath. "This is none of your concern, Foster," Polk said, but his confidence had evaporated. "You just threatened to kill her. That makes it my concern." Owen's gun never wavered. "Gwendolyn, come here." She crossed to him on shaking legs. Owen pulled her behind him with his free hand, never taking his eyes off the sheriff. "You are making a mistake," Polk said. "You do not know who you are dealing with." "Then why do you not tell us?" Owen suggested. "Who killed Richard Morrison? Who are you protecting?" Polk's jaw worked. For a moment, Gwendolyn thought he might actually confess. But then the front door opened again and Walter Finch stumbled in, followed by Thomas Morrison and Dr. Brennan. "We heard shouting," the doctor said, then stopped short when he saw Owen's drawn gun. "What is happening here?" "Sheriff Polk just tried to kill Miss Keller to stop her from testifying," Owen said flatly. Finch went white. Thomas Morrison's face hardened. "Is this true?" the doctor demanded. Polk seemed to realize he was trapped. His hand inched toward his gun. "Do not even think about it," Owen warned. "You are outnumbered and outgunned." "Sheriff Polk," Thomas Morrison said, his voice heavy with authority. "Tell us the truth. Who killed my father?" The silence stretched out, taut as a wire. Then Polk's shoulders sagged. "I did," he said quietly. Gwendolyn gasped. She had suspected many people, but somehow the sheriff had not been at the top of her list. "Why?" Thomas asked, his voice breaking. "Because your father was going to destroy me." Polk's face was haggard. "He had proof that I had been taking bribes, skimming money from fines and fees." He said he was going to expose me unless I gave him a cut of everything I took. I would have gone to prison, lost everything. So you killed him, Owen said. I went to the ranch to talk to him, to try to reason with him one more time, but he laughed at me. Said I was pathetic, that I was his dog and I would do what he said or he would ruin me. Polk's hands were shaking. I pulled my gun and I shot him, twice. Then I opened the safe and took the documents about me. I was going to make it look like a robbery, but then I heard someone coming. Clayton Pierce. So I went out the window and circled around to arrive with him like I had just gotten there. And you blamed Jacob because he was convenient, Gwendolyn said, her voice shaking with anger. The boy was nobody, Polk said. Better him than me. Thomas Morrison looked like he had been struck. My father was a terrible man, but he did not deserve to be murdered, and Jacob certainly did not deserve to hang for something he did not do. What do we do now? Finch asked nervously. We go to Judge Hendricks and tell him everything, Dr. Brennan said firmly. Sheriff Polk will be arrested and tried for murder. Jacob Hartman will be freed. Owen finally lowered his gun. Sounds like a plan. The next few hours were a blur. Judge Hendricks arrived at the courthouse, and they all told him what had happened. Polk was arrested by his own deputy, who looked shocked and betrayed. Jacob was released from his cell and reunited with his weeping mother. By the time the townspeople started arriving for the trial, word had already spread. The sheriff had killed Richard Morrison. The schoolteacher and the cowboy had solved the murder. Jacob Hartman was innocent. Gwendolyn stood on the courthouse steps, watching the sunrise, feeling exhausted and relieved and triumphant all at once. Owen came up beside her and slipped his hand into hers. You did it, he said softly. You saved that boy's life. We did it, Gwendolyn corrected. I could not have done it without you. Owen turned to face her, his blue eyes serious. I told you this morning that you reminded me why truth matters, but you have done more than that, Gwendolyn. You have given me a reason to stop drifting. Her heart skipped. What do you mean? I mean I want to stay in St. Joseph, with you. He took both her hands in his. I know we have only known each other a day. I know it is fast and probably crazy, but I have never met anyone like you. You stood up when everyone else stayed silent. You defended truth when others lied. And I stood with you because you are the best person I have ever known. Gwendolyn felt tears prickling her eyes. Owen, you are my conscience, he said, his voice rough with emotion. You remind me of the man I want to be, the man I can be. And if you will have me, I want to stay here and build a life with you. Yes, Gwendolyn whispered. Yes, I will have you. He kissed her there on the courthouse steps in front of God and the whole town, and Gwendolyn did not care who saw or what they said. She had found something rare and precious in Owen Foster, and she was not letting go. The weeks that followed were busy. Sheriff Polk was tried and convicted of murder, sentenced to hang. Clayton Pierce took over as interim sheriff until a new election could be held. Thomas Morrison began the difficult work of sorting through his father's affairs and making amends to the people his father had wronged. He returned the blackmail materials he found in the safe, including Finch's letters, which the banker promptly burned. Owen found work at the Morrison Ranch, and Thomas was grateful to have an honest man he could trust. Owen proved to be an excellent ranch hand, but more importantly, he was good with the horses and had a head for business. Within a month, Thomas had promoted him to assistant foreman. Gwendolyn continued teaching, and the town council, embarrassed by how close they had come to hanging an innocent boy, gave her a raise. She used the extra money to buy new books for the school. She and Owen courted properly, or as properly as two people could when they had already decided they were going to spend their lives together. He came to Sunday dinners at her house. She visited him at the ranch. They took long walks along the river and talked about everything and nothing. 3 months after they met, Owen proposed to her in the schoolhouse where she had been teaching Jacob the afternoon Richard Morrison was killed. He got down on one knee and offered her a simple gold band. "I do not have much to offer you," he said. "Just my name and my promise that I will love you and honor you and stand beside you for the rest of my life. You are the bravest, most honest woman I have ever met, and I want everyone to know that you are mine and I am yours." Gwendolyn pulled him to his feet and kissed him. "I do not need much, Owen Foster, just you." They were married in the church in St. Joseph on a bright October day in 1878. Jacob Hartman was Owen's best man, standing tall and proud, no longer the frightened boy in the jail cell. Thomas Morrison attended, along with Dr. Brennan and Mrs. Patterson and half the town. Walter Finch gave Gwendolyn away since she had no family left. It seemed fitting somehow that the man whose testimony had helped seal the case against Polk would walk her down the aisle. Owen looked heartbreakingly handsome in his new suit, his blue eyes shining as he watched Gwendolyn approach. When the minister asked if he took this woman as his wife, Owen's "I do" rang out clear and strong. They moved into Gwendolyn's little cottage, and Owen spent his evenings making improvements, adding a new room, fixing the porch, planting a bigger garden. He was building a home, he said, for the family they would have. Their first child came in the summer of 1879, a healthy baby boy with Owen's blue eyes and Gwendolyn's determination. They named him Samuel, after Owen's uncle who had raised him. Gwendolyn continued teaching for another year after Samuel was born, bringing the baby to school with her. The children loved having a baby in the classroom, and Samuel seemed content to sleep in his basket while his mother taught reading and arithmetic. But when Gwendolyn became pregnant again in 1880, she decided to take a break from teaching. Owen was making good money at the ranch, enough that they did not need her salary, and she wanted to focus on their growing family. Their daughter was born in the spring of 1881, a tiny thing with dark hair and a fierce cry. They named her Margaret, after Gwendolyn's mother. Owen was a devoted father, coming home every evening to play with Samuel and rock Margaret to sleep. He told them stories about cowboys and horses, and Gwendolyn would watch him with their children and feel such overwhelming love she could barely breathe. Jacob Hartman went on to finish his education with the new schoolteacher, and eventually got a job as a clerk at the land office. He never forgot what Gwendolyn and Owen had done for him, and he named his own firstborn daughter Gwendolyn in her honor. Thomas Morrison married a widow from Kansas City in 1882, a kind woman who helped him transform the ranch from a place of fear and manipulation into a respectable business. He and Owen became close friends, and Thomas was godfather to all of Owen and Gwendolyn's children. Sheriff Polk was hanged in the spring of 1879. Some people said it was justice. Others said it was a shame that a man could fall so far. Gwendolyn felt only sadness that he had valued his own comfort more than the truth, more than a boy's life. But mostly, she did not think about those dark days. She was too busy living the life she and Owen were building together. They had 2 more children, another boy in 1883 and another girl in 1885. Their cottage became too small, so Owen bought land just outside town and built them a proper house, big enough for their family and the life they were creating on their 10th anniversary. Owen took Gwendolyn back to the courthouse steps where he had first stood up for her. "Do you remember that day?" he asked, holding her hand. "Every detail," Gwendolyn said. "I was so scared, but I knew I had to speak up. You were magnificent." Owen pulled her close. "You defended truth when others lied, and I could not help but stand with you. You were my conscience then, and you still are. Everything good in my life started the day I met you. Everything good in my life started that day too, Gwendolyn whispered. I love you, Owen Foster. I love you, Gwendolyn Foster. He kissed her tenderly. Thank you for giving me a home. Thank you for giving me a family. Thank you for showing me what it means to be brave. They stood on those courthouse steps, 10 years older and infinitely richer in all the ways that mattered, and Gwendolyn thought about how strange life was. One moment of courage, one decision to speak up for what was right, and everything had changed. She had saved Jacob's life, but Owen had saved hers just as surely. He had given her partnership when she had been alone, support when she had been afraid, and love beyond anything she had imagined. Their children grew up strong and healthy. Samuel became a lawyer, fighting for justice like his parents had taught him. Margaret became a teacher like her mother. The younger two found their own paths, but all of them carried the lessons Owen and Gwendolyn had lived. Stand up for truth. Defend the innocent. Love with your whole heart. Years later, when Gwendolyn was an old woman sitting on the porch of the house Owen had built, surrounded by grandchildren and great-grandchildren, someone asked her about that day in 1878 when she had stood up to the sheriff. Were you afraid? The child asked. Terrified, Gwendolyn admitted. But sometimes you have to be brave even when you are afraid, especially when you are afraid. Grandma was the bravest woman in Missouri, Owen said from his chair beside her. He was old now, too, his dark hair gone white, his face lined with age, but his blue eyes still shone when he looked at her. Grandpa was brave, too, Gwendolyn corrected. He stood with me when no one else would. Because you were worth standing for, Owen said, taking her hand. You always have been. They sat together in the golden afternoon light, hands clasped, surrounded by the family they had built and the life they had created. It had all started with one moment of courage, one decision to speak truth when everyone else was lying. And it had led them here, to a love that had lasted decades, to a legacy of children and grandchildren who knew that truth mattered and courage counted. Gwendolyn looked at Owen, at the man who had called her his conscience and meant it, who had loved her through all the years and all the challenges, and she knew that she would make the same choice again in a heartbeat, because defending truth had brought her everything that mattered. It had brought her Owen, and with Owen had come a lifetime of love. That was the real ending to their story, not the trial or the investigation or even the wedding. The real ending was this: two people growing old together, still holding hands, still standing for what was right, still loving each other with everything they had. The children and grandchildren eventually went home, and the sun set over the Missouri hills, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose. Owen helped Gwendolyn inside, his arm around her waist, still protective after all these years. You ever regret it? He asked as they settled into their chairs by the fireplace. Speaking up that day, getting involved in all that danger, Gwendolyn looked at him, at the life they had built, at the home they shared. Not for a single second, she said. It brought me you. It brought me you too, Owen agreed. He leaned over and kissed her forehead. You are still my conscience, Gwendolyn Foster. You still remind me every day what it means to be a good man. And you still stand with me, Gwendolyn said softly. After all these years, you are still standing with me. Always, Owen promised. Until my last breath, I will stand with you. They sat together in the firelight, two people who had found each other in the midst of darkness and had chosen to walk into the light together. Their love story had begun with truth and courage, and it had grown into something beautiful and lasting. Outside, the stars came out over St. Joseph, Missouri, the same stars that had shone the night Owen first kissed Gwendolyn, the night he first told her he wanted to stay. The town had changed over the decades, grown and modernized, but some things remained constant: truth mattered. Courage counted. And love, real love, lasted forever. That was the legacy Owen and Gwendolyn Foster left to their children and their children's children. Not wealth or fame or power, but the simple truth that standing up for what was right, defending the innocent, and loving with your whole heart was the only way to live. And every year, on the anniversary of the day, Gwendolyn had stood on those courthouse steps and spoken truth to power. The Foster family would gather. They would tell the story again, of the schoolteacher who defended an innocent boy, of the cowboy who stood with her, of the love that had grown between them. It was a story worth telling, worth remembering, worth passing down through the generations. Because it was a story about the things that really mattered. In the end, when Owen and Gwendolyn finally passed, within months of each other after more than 50 years of marriage, the whole town turned out for their funerals. People spoke of their courage, their integrity, their love for each other and for justice. But the truest eulogy was the one their grandson Samuel gave, standing where Gwendolyn had once stood on the courthouse steps. "My grandmother defended truth when others lied," he said, his voice carrying across the square. "And my grandfather stood with her and called her his conscience. Together, they showed us all what it means to live with courage and love with your whole heart. They showed us that one moment of bravery can change everything, that standing up for what is right is always worth it, even when it costs you." They loved each other with a love that lasted a lifetime, and they left us all a legacy of truth and courage that will last for generations. We are all better for having known them, and this town is better for their lives. The crowd stood in respectful silence, remembering the schoolteacher and the cowboy who had fallen in love while fighting for justice, who had built a life together based on truth and courage and unwavering devotion to each other. Their story was over, but the legacy they left behind lived on in their children, their grandchildren, their great-grandchildren, and in everyone who heard their story and was inspired to stand up for truth, to defend the innocent, to love with courage and conviction. That was how love stories were supposed to end. Not with grand gestures or dramatic declarations, but with a life well lived, a love fully given, and a legacy that would outlast them both. Owen and Gwendolyn Foster had found each other in the spring of 1878 in St. Joseph, Missouri. They had stood together against injustice, fought for an innocent boy, and fallen in love in the process. And then they had spent the next 50 years building a life together, raising a family, and showing everyone around them what real love looked like. It was a simple story in many ways, but it was also a profound one, because it showed that ordinary people could do extraordinary things when they chose courage over fear, truth over lies, and love over everything else. And that, in the end, was the greatest legacy of all. Not wealth or fame or power, but love. Real, lasting, courageous love that stood the test of time and left the world better than it found it. The story of Owen and Gwendolyn Foster was a love story for the ages, a reminder that true love was worth fighting for, that standing up for what was right mattered, and that two people who chose to stand together could change the world. Their graves stood side by side in the cemetery overlooking St. Joseph, two simple headstones marking the resting place of two extraordinary people. Visitors would sometimes stop and read the inscriptions. On Gwendolyn's stone, "She defended truth when others lied." On Owen's stone, "He stood with her for she was his conscience." And beneath both inscriptions the same words, "Together in life, together in death, together forever in love." It was a fitting end to a beautiful story, a story of truth and courage and love. A story that started with one woman's brave decision to speak up and one man's brave decision to stand with her. A story that proved that love, real love, was the most powerful force in the world. And so the story of Owen and Gwendolyn Foster came to its close, not with sadness but with celebration. Celebration of a life well lived, a love fully realized, and a legacy that would endure. They had shown the world what it meant to defend truth, to stand for justice, and to love with everything you had. And in doing so, they had created something beautiful and lasting that would inspire generations to come. That was the real magic of their story. Not that it was extraordinary, but that it showed how ordinary people, through courage and love and unwavering commitment to truth, could do extraordinary things. The cowboy and the schoolteacher. The man and the woman who stood together when others fell silent. The couple who showed St. Joseph, Missouri, what real love looked like. Their story was over, but their love lived on in every person who heard their tale and was inspired to be braver, to love deeper, to stand up for truth no matter the cost. And that, truly, was the happiest ending of all. Not a perfect ending, but a real one, a true one. An ending that celebrated the power of courage and the endurance of love. Owen and Gwendolyn Foster had lived well, loved deeply, and left behind a legacy that would never be forgotten. And in the end, what more could anyone ask for than that?